Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bin that we're preparing to check in on today is now 200 days of age. And last time we were in here, 11 days ago, we sort of predicted that we would be coming back today on the bin's 200th day in service, assuming that it fits into the schedule nicely, and it just happened that it did. So, I don't really go too crazy trying to be mindful of celebrating milestone dates in my worm bins. I mean, even the bins that I checked in on yesterday, one of them had just reached its 100th day in service, and it was being fed on the 106th day, so we totally skipped over its 100th day in service, and for that matter, I didn't even make mention of it in yesterday's video, oddly enough. And this is what I was a little bit curious of, was what we're going to find when we come in here. All these little white spots everywhere, those are all springtails, and it's very likely that once we scoop some material out of here, we're going to see even more of those little guys. I'm kind of glad that the springtails are really only showing up in large numbers in this container, because I wouldn't be too thrilled about having them everywhere, but the fact that they're sort of isolated here, it doesn't bother me so much. I guess it's kind of interesting, and I'm assuming that they're springtails. I mean, I've seen people mention how springtails have a tendency to get airborne and start jumping, and I guess that's probably where they get their name from. And that's something I don't really see with these insects, so there again, I'm just kind of under the assumption that what I've got here is springtails, but I couldn't say for sure that that's what we have here. Look how many there are on this piece of paper, too. My goodness. I think it was springtails that somebody said could be lured with a piece of kind of burnt piece of wood or a piece of charred material, assuming that wood would probably work well, because they really are drawn to that. And I've actually thought about maybe getting my fire pit out and doing a little fire one of these days, just to have a few pieces of charred wood on hand to give that a try in here. I mean, for that matter, I've got a couple buckets that I'd like to take some wood out of that I'm storing, to free up those buckets to start storing some castings in too. I've seen a couple insects take off from out of here. Not the springtails, but some sort of flying insect I noticed. I don't know if they were gnats or what they were, but I'm starting to wonder if it's time to start thinking about preparing a new batch of my mosquito dunks BTI solution. So I'm pretty sure that that stuff really does a nice job controlling the fruit flies, but I don't think it's going to harm the gnats. Who knows? If I start treating the system with the mosquito dunks BTI bacteria, I would have to assume that it would definitely take care of reducing the amount of gnats I see. Springtails, I'm pretty sure we've been applying BTI to this system pretty regularly, but not seeing any change to the number of springtails we see in here. I think maybe the moisture in here is what they're thriving on. I've actually thought about maybe just not even using that plastic covering and leaving only maybe paper. And that would allow the top surface of the material to dry out pretty good. But yeah, but it would probably be fine. You know, the material in the bin is pretty much castings anymore. Here and there on the very edge of the bin where we've been feeding regularly, there's a good amount of shredded paper and cardboard mix that we included with the last feeding. So you see a lot of bedding materials over here in the feeding area. But as you start working your way over to this edge of the bin is actually stuff that we've hardly touched. In fact, last week we didn't even, or not last week, 11 days ago, last time we checked in here, we didn't even explore that material. We just left it untouched. because that stuff over there is the material that these worms used to live in when they were in a smaller container. And it was a few months ago at this point, I think. I don't remember how long it's been now, but we did eventually get to the point where it seemed like this population, which was actually rebounding from a very, very small number of worms. I think we started out with what was estimated to be only a few dozen worms in here, or at least in the container that they used to occupy previously. And their numbers started to, recover nicely, and it did seem like at some point that they had grown to a sufficient population that we should probably move them to this somewhat larger, what I consider to be medium-sized container. Because the container that they had been in was one that I sort of consider to be one of my smaller size containers that I do worm composting in. And the worms are in good numbers, If it is true that we started with 36 worms 200 days ago, then you'd have to admit that these worms have done quite nicely in recovering their numbers and mating and reproducing and growing their count in here. Yeah. I am starting to get that feeling like leaving off the plastic covering in here would probably be a good idea for just one feeding interval. I mean, next time we come back in, we might find that things have dried sufficiently to, permit us to restore the covering, but I think that I do want to start seeing a reduction to the number of mites that live in this container. Well, we've made a pretty good size hole over here, and I'm just realizing that I had sort of a game plan in mind, and I've sort of reversed it completely. What I thought about actually doing was exploring this pretty well worked material first, and possibly even stacking it up a little bit taller, which would enable us to move everything over a little bit, so that this stuff on this edge could sort of be the starting point of the material that goes into a container like this, and then at the very opposite edge you would already have stuff that would be classified as pretty much castings only, ideally depopulated already, because the worms would be over on the side that's regularly getting fed, possibly covered with plastic to keep moisture locked in down here, whereas possibly on this side we would leave this open to the air, allowing it to dry and become material that the worms would not find so comfortable to be in, driving them elsewhere. So what, really quick, before we get started, I think, now we've also got the middle section too, which would, I don't know, be somewhat unexplored, but I still like the idea of really quickly going into this stuff on this edge, giving it a quick stir, since last time we didn't even look at this stuff over here. And then after we've done a quick little spot check, we could stack it up a little bit higher than it was, hopefully giving us extra space to nudge everything over in this general direction a little bit more. I always feel like I've got to be pretty careful though when I'm working this close to the edge in my bins. I always worry about spilling everything out onto the tabletop here, or onto the floor, and it's almost like I summoned that exact behavior by saying the word spill. It was almost at that very moment that I sort of almost spilled a little bit out. I mean, I did spill a little bit out, but it wasn't too much. So yeah, this material here is really nice. I mean, this stuff seems like it could easily just be harvested. Perhaps if it were a little bit drier, if it wasn't covered in plastic, then the worms wouldn't find it to be as hospitable to be in. And if we're going to leave the entire system uncovered for a while, then I think we'll start seeing a little bit of drying of this material, which would be kind of nice. And then maybe we can actually start treating this as an actual wedge sort of setup, where you're running a continuous process where new stuff gets put in there and the completed stuff on this edge actually gets removed, So I'm not sure how that would really play out because I've never done that before. I've tried demonstrating a similar setup to this in the past, just to say, hey, this is how some people do it when they're running one of these continuous flow type configurations or wedge pattern configurations, but I've never actually harvested castings from such a system. So maybe what we could do is, you know, in one of these future check-ins, we could actually, after we've allowed the material on this edge to dry a little bit, we could actually maybe start scooping some of the castings out to give ourselves more space to work in here. You can tell I'm a little bit cramped. I'm trying to very carefully bring the level over on this completed edge up, but I'm also trying not to blend in all kinds of debris. I suppose if I had started on this edge, even used that as an opportunity to pick out little bits of stuff that don't really belong in material that would be considered as finished castings, I could have started just gradually moving stuff over to that side of the bin. And oh boy. And then this would have been a somewhat more elegantly executed demonstration, but I guess I sort of caught on to what I was doing and how it didn't really jive with what I had hoped to do in here. A little late in the game, but whatever, you get the idea. Maybe next time we'll do better. So yeah, we've definitely brought the entire level of the bin over on this edge up, and then I've nudged a whole bunch of stuff over here, and I think that this pretty gooey stuff that we excavated straight out of the feeding area could be dropped in here alongside the more worked stuff that's right beneath it. It's only because I do want to give myself a sense of how much space I really have on that far edge before I load it up with fresh stuff, and then maybe we can even pick out any of the larger bits that we encounter over here and move them over into the feeding zone, where we're going to add a bunch of fresh bedding and fresh food. But we don't have to go too crazy with it. I just thought that if there were large chunks of paper floating around, then we could just move them over. It's funny, it does seem like the way we're doing this now, we've actually had a chance to explore the actual feeding zone as well as the most finished edge of the bin. But what's right here in the middle we didn't get to see, and I suppose we could check it out at the very, very end. But if I had been a little bit more conscientious of what I was doing here, we could have done this a little bit better. But you know, maybe we skip checking the very middle. Maybe all we'll do is drop in some bedding, give them their food, and leave it at that. But then I think we probably will leave off the plastic coverings and start giving the system an opportunity to dry off a little bit. So I think it would benefit things in here. There's certainly way more moisture than is needed. So let's come in here with my prepared bedding mix over here. It's funny, I've been having somewhat unfortunate luck down here in my wormery lately. The other day my little personal blender device pooped out, just stopped spinning. Well, it wouldn't even spin right from the get-go. I went to grind up some stuff. I was going to make some worm chow. I had already placed all the ingredients into the little cup, and then it just wouldn't run. So I had another similar device out in the garage that I bought in. That one was an actual Magic Bullet name brand device. The one I had been using up until then was a no-name brand sort of device. And after a few spins on the actual Magic Bullet, that thing started making, well, right from the beginning, it started making some weird odors, kind of that burning electronics odor. And then that started really acting weird too. And then I looked at it, and the little spinning wheel that drives the grinding cutter wheel was off center. So it seems like something broke inside the mechanism. Luckily I found somebody on Facebook Marketplace that was actually giving one of those magic bullet bases away. No cups or canisters or anything like that, just the base. So the next day I was able to replace what had broken on me, and then just yesterday, unfortunately, I had another little mechanical mishap where my shredder stopped working. And then me, the tinkerer, I just couldn't resist going in there with some tools, and then next thing you know, there's a huge spark and the breaker trips off, and now I'm in the dark. So I short-circuited something over there in the circuit board of the poor shredder that had worked so well for me over the past year and a half since I received it, or since I purchased it used for only 20 bucks, so whatever. But now I'm down once again a critical device that I need for doing my worm bin maintenance. I'm now without a shredder. Luckily I was able to fill up a couple 5-gallon buckets with shredded paper and cardboard, so right now I've got a pretty good supply of just shredded materials in buckets. But now once again I'm on the lookout for a replacement device. Alright, let's get this feeding completed. We got some pumpkin here for them. Pumpkin's going to bring a good bit of moisture in with it. Even though the moisture content of the bedding that we just applied is, I mean, it's got a little bit of moisture to it. It's not terribly damp, but it does have a little bit of moisture. When I prepare my bedding materials, I use not only the shredded paper cardboard that comes out of the shredder, but I also sprinkle in leaves, and then I also dampen the whole concoction. So it's pretty nice prepared bedding mix that the worms get. And now, besides the pumpkin, they're also receiving some frozen potato peel here. I just figured I would try to break it apart a little bit. I mean, everything here came out of the freezer not too long ago, so it's pretty frozen, and I guess these pumpkin chunks will take a few minutes to thaw out, but the potato peels, I believe, will thaw out quite quickly. Let's drop in a little bit of pulverized eggshell as grit to go with the feeding. And then after we put in the coffee portion, we can also include a little bit of worm chow. And then this used coffee filter right here can become our replacement feeding zone indicator. So yeah, we've definitely increased the size of this feeding area. I think it might have only been about half the size previously, so we just expanded it significantly. And now we've almost got like 3 separate distinct sections here. We've got what's almost completely finished castings material with just little bits of unbroken down material scattered in it a little bit, possibly only because of what I did here today. Otherwise it probably would have been almost completely free of anything. And then here in the middle we've got, down at the bottom, probably some pretty well broken down material. Now it's covered up with some of the stuff that had been in the feeding zone, so there's a whole bunch of, you know, bedding combined with a lot of castings and maybe even some food bits floating around out here. I mean, we did collect up some of the larger food bits and return them to the feeding area, but I would have to assume that there's still all kinds of food type material scattered down within that stuff over there in the middle now. So the worms should be pretty content to be hanging out in pretty much any portion of this bin anymore. And if we were to cover up with only paper today, things will start drying out. So that'll leave the top surface of the bin a little bit inhospitable for worms to hang out on, but they'll be quite content to, you know, hang out down in the lower sections of the material. And you know, this stuff over here in the feeding area, what moisture it does have does seem like it should be protected, so to leave this uncovered would probably be a mistake. At least uncovered with plastic. So I'm thinking the plastic covering probably should come back, but in a way that it covers only the feeding area, because then that feeding area will maintain its moisture level and become a place that the worms will want to visit, versus being a dry, barren area that the worms are just unable to enter because of the dryness. So I'll do a little fold over of our plastic covering here so that the majority of the bin is able to breathe a bit and kick off some of what I think to be excess moisture in here. And then they'll have moisture locked in under the plastic over in the feeding area so that they can go in there and start working down those freshly added foods. Okay, very nice. I think if we just place this directly onto the surface here, it will allow for some airflow to come and go beneath the paper and allow things to dry a bit. And the stuff under the plastic will definitely be nice and moist. So that's it for our check-in on our 200-day-old mixed bin of worms. When I say mixed bin of worms, there's red wigglers, Indian blue worms, and European night crawlers theoretically living in here. Whether they really are broken down in those types of arrangements or not, I couldn't tell you for sure, but that's what I believe lives in here. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.